So like what we have to do is that we have to be way more pragmatic with our agility, deeply understand the principles underneath what we're doing, understand when it works, understand when it won't, and then make sure we have appropriate compensating controls. And then within that framework, the culture of agility will begin to emerge. Who ended up going to, who was at the keynote just a few minutes ago? Yeah? Any cool takeaways from that? I'm gonna try to build on it a little bit. We'll see if it works. Any cool takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, if you can put yourself in the mind of the user, have direct conversations with a lot of us can.
Yeah.
Or various political barriers or whatever.
Yeah.
Observing end users or having conversations with direct users.
Yeah.
You can figure out things to pivot your mind on how you would approach your development.
Yeah, cool. Anybody else? Any thoughts? No, this is not gonna be fun if you guys don't talk to me. Come on, let's talk. Let's talk a little bit. Come on. Okay, so the question is what were any key takeaways from the keynote this morning?
Empathize.
Empathize, what was that?
To piggyback off of her, give yourself permission to be human.
Give yourself permission to be human. Anything?
Yeah, for me, it's like the idea that Agile is about the connection with people, and we forget about that. Empathy is what connects you with.
Interesting. So it's super clear why you guys came to a talk that's entitled Building a Culture of Agility. You know what I picked up on? He said something early on, and he was talking about like when you're building a car, you have an assembly line for building the car. And so you ideate the vehicle and then you run it through the assembly line. And he made the case that in software, most organizations don't have assembly lines. And he was making the argument that like the daily stand-ups and the reviews and retrospectives and all the things that we were doing in Scrum weren't serving the team. I thought that was interesting, right? That was actually what really stood out for me. And so when I first heard the talk of, empathy engineering, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna like this. But then he hit it, and I was just like, this is cool, right? That is like, to me, the point. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to tell you the end of the story, and then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll see if I got to the end right, okay? So if you don't like the end of the story, then you can just pick up and leave right after, because that's all I'm gonna talk about the whole time. So I have a really strongly held belief that culture emerges from the structures and processes that we install into our organization, okay? And what I react to pretty negatively, if you've read much of my stuff or come to my talks, when we talk about having an agile mindset or creating an agile culture, what I'm trying to figure out is what are we all supposed to do? Just be happy and have fun and be playful and do games and all this kind of stuff. And if that's what culture means, to what end, right? What do we want an agile culture for? And so what I'm going to unpack with you guys a little bit is the relationship between culture, the practices we choose to implement, the underlying structure, the assembly line, if you will, and how all of it goes together to create the kinds of ecosystems that we want to work in. Okay? Okay, I'll pause if anyone wants to get up and leave. That's the whole talk. You guys are going to stick around for a little bit? Okay, cool. Okay, so,
I do have one.
Yeah, shoot for me.
Yesterday, I attended a session, you were in that session yesterday, where we talked about culture. Remember, he asked this question of culture, or what was it, strategy?
I can remember.
Yeah, and he was asking us, how do you build, is it culture processes, cultural processes?
Yeah, well, let's unpack that a little bit, right? So I've got really 4 things that I want to go through, and I'm hoping it can be a little bit of a conversation. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what do we mean by culture? Oh, by the way, for the gentleman taking the picture, if anybody wants to text and grab the deck, you guys don't have to take pictures of stuff. You can just text that to, 33777. My marketing team set that up for me, so it's actually kind of cool, right? So we're going to talk about what is an agile culture. So people that come to a culture talk, I'm kind of curious what culture means to you, right? We're going to use that as a starting place. And then the next thing, oh, no, I don't want to go yet. We're going to talk about why is an agile culture important? Like, what does it do for us? Then the third thing we're going to explore is whose job is it to create an agile culture? And then the last thing we're going to talk about is how do we get there? Okay? So pretty quick. So what is an agile culture? So when you guys say, I want to have a culture of agility, what does that mean to you? Yeah.
The ability to quickly pivot and everyone is aware of what needs to be done.
Okay. So they have visibility into the work and they can change direction when, okay, cool. Anybody else? Yeah.
The ability to pivot without losing anything you've already done.
Pivot without losing anything you've already done. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
To me, I go back with what culture means.
Yeah.
It's just a set of values, practices, traditions that a group of people have. And so in this case, the agile culture would be
So you said practices, values, principles.
beliefs.
Okay.
So in this case, it will be anything that surrounds the manifesto.
Okay.
So the people believe
Yeah.
principles and values and live through them.
So you know, like I can never actually quote the manifesto verbatim, but like you know, people and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What else?
But she's talking about shared values and those type of things.
Like, give me an example of like a shared value in your world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't work anymore.
Okay.
Right now.
In your glorious retirement, give me an idea of a shared value. Yeah.
Okay. So when you ask yourself what's the nature of agile work,
Mm-hmm.
most people will talk about many things, but there are a number of principles, and one of them is the concept of minimalization.
Okay.
And that is that what we do is we work on minimalized types of work products.
Okay.
So you can think about that from an archaeological or a musical perspective, but it's from a work perspective. So that's why user stories should be smallish.
Mm-hmm.
That's why work streams should be smallish. That's why we think about these things.
Yeah.
But it's a shared set of values. So if you're thinking in terms of massive projects, which is fine because it's waterfall-ish, it doesn't have to be, that's not an agile part of the agile culture.
Okay.
See, so we're building an agile culture.
Fair enough. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
I just think it's everybody feeling to have the safety and the space to say what they want, and I think they need to be. And I'm gonna kind of contradict that without losing anything in the past, we need to be ready to throw away everything you've done and do everything you do, no matter if you're 100% of it done.
Yeah. Gentleman back.
Yeah, Mike. See if I get this right. I want agile in my organization to look like orchestrating human relationships in a way that will unlock human capital for the best possible outcome.
Okay. Cool. Listen.
Going off what she was saying, the like values and beliefs was kind of like predictability, innovation, smaller slices.
Yeah.
To see what to better get things understandably done.
Yeah.
In a way to reduce waste.
Okay, so I'm gonna pivot for just a second, and since I've already told you the end of the story, I don't mind asking this question. What gets in the way of these things, these values, practices, beliefs, things like that in these organizations that we work in?
Just because you have the values on paper as an organization or whatever, if you're not living them or actually supporting them, it's just words on paper.
Yeah.
And the people feel that, and then they stop speaking up in that psychological safety room.
Okay, so it's absence of psychological safety?
Is a big chunk of it, but I feel like if you have a culture of if one of your values is innovation, and you just put that on paper and you have stuff going down, you're like, tell me how you innovate, but you don't actually give people the time to innovate or help them understand that small wins are also innovation.
Right.
And they don't know how to articulate it, and you keep saying you're not innovating. It's
Yeah.
our culture, but we're not giving you time to innovate, and we're not going to tell you what it means.
Yeah.
Then it just becomes words on a paper, and then people just become robotic in
Yeah.
their behaviors.
Okay. You said something interesting, Josh. What was your comment? Explain that, unpack that for me.
Mostly from another talk that I watched of yours was basically kind of the resistances that have
Oh, so you've got the inside scoop. You know why I'm interested in this. Okay, cool.
the built-in stuff
Okay.
that people have. I don't even know a very good definition for it, but
Yeah.
it's kind of the gunk in the river almost. Like
Yeah.
But it's been there forever, so like there's no way you gotta.
Yeah.
Is it the structure and process?
Yeah.
I think it's
Well, again, we got cheaters in the room, so hang on a minute. So, yeah, what do you got?
I would say it's the people.
The people? Okay, the people get in the way of an agile culture?
I would say so.
Tell me more.
Because if you're on an agile team, let's say, and half of the team tries to follow the practices or do what they think would be more agile, and you have the other team that is the other half of the team that is always like, well, we can't break that down. We can't
Right.
break that down. We can't get smaller. We can't break that down.
Right.
There's no way to pull the work apart. We can't.
Right.
So I would honestly say it's the people that get in the way of an agile culture, because no matter how you want to do agile your own way, breaking it down for your team, you can't if the people don't buy into it.
Interesting. Yeah, one more, and then I'm going to try to pull
It's
forward.
the innovation idea of like people aren't. You're not allowing one to actually innovate. Kind of.
When you
Right.
say organization, are you coming for those that might be like Larman's laws based, like how the hierarchy is?
Yeah.
Is it constrained?
Well, so like what I'm thinking about, right? This is a thing, and so there's a really couple of interesting counterpoints, right? So we have the idea of systems, we have the idea of dependencies, but this is where the agile community lands a lot. Is it's like the people don't buy in, right? And like one of the examples that I use sometimes is the idea, just a really easy example to understand, is like salespeople, right? We might want to create a sales culture in our organization where people collaborate. But what if I put two salespeople into the same region and gave them both individual sales goals? Like I win or you win. Like would it be the people's fault that they weren't collaborating and working together? Or would it be the systems and things that they're working in that would prevent them from working together?
Enables a zero-sum game.
Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of just wander around my slides here because I think this is an interesting conversation. So, one of the things that what is that?
What you're competing against another culture.
Well,
Culture is, there's a top-down hierarchical structure, bureaucratic structure, and you're competing against that culture because these people are operating within the context of a well-entrenched culture.
Well, so it's interesting. So even in this conversation, you see how we use culture differently, right? Everybody kind of blends their own little take of what an agile culture is, right? So you're kind of thinking about systems and bureaucracies. This gentleman, Josh, was talking about dependencies. Aaron was talking about structure and governance within the organization. Is it Nina?
Yes.
Nina is talking about like people and resistance to change, right? It's so when we go into, so like a lot of times what I see our industry do quite a bit is we want a result, right? We want to have the ability to put things into market in small batches. We want the ability to create customer feedback. We want the ability to change direction when we learn new things. So like one of the things that I think about at the team level is the idea of think about what an agile team gives to us. I've got 5, 6, 7 people that are cross-functional. That team has everyone and everything necessary to deliver what's in their backlog. They work together as a team. They swarm around user stories, okay? This is kind of like ideal agile. The teams are operating off of a really crisp and clear backlog, user stories that are broken down into like 1 to 2 to 3 day chunks, where I get a handful of them done within the course of a sprint. Okay, I have the technical ability to actually produce a working, tested increment of product at the end of every sprint. Okay, now think about it. If I have those 3 things in place, now I can go to this human being, right, that's on my team and say, look, you don't have any dependencies between you and the rest of the organization. It's just the 7 of you guys. Your product owner has brought you this really, really well-formed backlog made up of these little tiny user stories, okay? Now what I'm asking you to do is to participate in sprint planning. I'm asking you to have a conversation with your product owner about what to pull off the backlog and to collaborate on how the work is going to get done, maybe to make a sprint commitment or to create a sprint target, to do what you can to burn down work through the course of the sprint, to meet at the end and do a demo for your customer, to do a retrospective and to learn from that demo about how we want to evolve the product and how we want to work better as a team. Now think about this for a second. What if I have a team where the QA people are in a different group? Or I have a technical dependency because I'm more like an application person, and I have to make a change to an API on the back end that isn't my responsibility. Okay? I have to make a database change, and that's a different group. Okay? So I'm on a team that doesn't have everything and everyone necessary, and I go to that person and I say, you're being really resistant to change. You need to get on board. And they go, cognitive dissonance, right? If you guys, I get to work with a lot of different companies. It's kind of a cool thing about what I do. And like some of the most difficult people that I've ever worked with in companies are like hardcore security engineers. Any hardcore security engineers in here? Or architect kind of level people that support legacy mainframes, right? Anybody ever worked in an environment with a 50-year-old legacy mainframe? Yes. Yeah, got it, right? So let's say I have this tangled up mess of software, okay? I change one thing, I break 50 other things. You ever worked in that environment? Okay, it takes 18 months to release anything, but they fake it by having like 18 parallel releases. So like we're all delivering every month, but it's like 18-month projects that are delivered every month. All the integration and merging and defects and all the things that come from that. Now you sit down with that group and you say, we're gonna do Scrum, right? We're gonna break things down in little pieces. We're gonna work together as a team. We're gonna produce working tested software at the end of every sprint. And we're gonna get feedback from the customer, and we're gonna pivot and adapt as we learn new things. What do you think they're gonna do?
The question is posed because I've had that. Is how do I put?
Given the fact you're retired and probably grew up in IT, I totally believe that you've been in that situation. So yeah.
How do I put 10 pounds of dirt in a 5-pound bag? And that was the question the mainframe COBOL program was asked to the guy who was acting as coach.
Right.
His response was inadequate because he didn't understand the mainframe.
Didn't understand the mainframe environment, right? And that's a little bit of what our keynote was talking about today. It's like we come in sometimes as Agile coaches, and we have a belief that Scrum is going to work, right? Because it works for other people, right? So why won't it work here, right? We just do Scrum, and Scrum is going to solve all our problems. But without understanding the context that that person is in, going back to the keynote again, understanding that that assembly line doesn't exist, like a big part of Agile transformation is, what is that? Yeah, we're kind of jumping a step, right? And so that's kind of like the big case that I'm trying to make in industry is that we're adopting practices, and when people resist the practices, we're suggesting that they're resistant to change, or they won't get on board or something like that, or a blanket statement like, well, we don't have leadership support, or we don't have a culture of agility or whatever. And what I'm kind of hypothesizing, have a lot of evidence to think my hypothesis is valid, is that it's the underlying assembly line that we have to do. I bet you probably a good part of the people in this room are in the automotive industry. There's some automotive people in the room. So kind of think about it like this. So this is where like the assembly line metaphor kind of breaks down a little bit in software, right? Because software is not really about building the same thing over and over at scale. It's a little bit more of a lean problem. Now, if you were going to apply Agile to the building and manufacturing of a car, right, that's kind of difficult in our current configuration. right? Because the best that you could do is scrum through the assembly line, scrum through the design process, scrum through all the management of the work, and scrum through the assembly line of putting together a car. I've done a little bit of research. I don't have any firsthand experience with this, but if you look at like what Tesla is doing with how they're manufacturing cars, they've totally turned the paradigm of manufacturing on its head, right? There's a concept in the DoD world called Agile Open Digital or Open Agile Digital, I can't remember, right? Where they're really talking about how do we build hardware, how do we build like rockets and airplanes and submarines and things like that in a more agile way. Right, so again, no expert, I'm probably talking about something that's a little bit out of turn for me, but the principle is kind of interesting, right? The way that I think of like a Tesla versus a legacy car is that they've basically taken like what would have been like a legacy monolith, an existing car as they're currently manufactured, and turned it into a services-oriented vehicle. Right, so again, for anybody who's like deep into software, right, and again, I'm just kind of like on the edge of my expertise on this, but imagine like a service bus with modules that plug into it, right? Each module is a self-contained entity with interfaces and adapters wrapped in tests, so that entity isn't software, but it's a motor or a braking system or a sensor or something like that. Right? The way Tesla can build cars right now is that they iterate within that service boundary, can change that software dynamically in real time, and then as the performance of that battery or that sensor or that braking system or that motor changes, as long as the adapter and the connector stay in place, they can plug those two things in. It allows the motor to be represented as a digital twin. It allows it to be wrapped in tests and mocked and stub out, just like what we talk about in software. Okay? It's fascinating. Google Joe Justice Tesla. He's actually done some brilliant videos. But basically, the metaphor, which is really cool, is that you're basically taking the legacy monolith of a car and you're turning it into a services-oriented object. Right? So just like really simple, like what's happening, there's this interesting set of things. I'm starting to connect some dots here, so I'm just talking about it all the time and figure the more I talk about it, you guys will either cross-check me or tell me I'm wrong or I'll be validated, one of the two, right? But again, I see the problem very much like we take legacy mainframes and we turn them into services-oriented architectures, right? You can't do agile practices on top of a legacy mainframe, right? It doesn't lend itself to incremental and iterative delivery. And because it doesn't lend itself to incremental and iterative delivery, it doesn't lend itself into breaking requirements into small components. It doesn't lend itself towards collaboration and delivery and sitting with your product owner. And so what Kelsey was talking about was if we put agile practices on top of legacy monoliths without changing the underlying systems and structures that's up underneath, that's not a culture problem in Agile. That is a systems and structures problem in Agile. So just like it doesn't make a ton of sense to apply Scrum onto a lean manufacturing assembly line, it just doesn't, right? I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't get some benefit from it, but it's not what it was designed for, right? But if you took that legacy monolith and you broke it apart, you did the legacy refactoring, maybe made it like a cloud native thing, put it into a CI/CD pipeline, wrapped it in tests, knew if it was broken all the time, right? Then you could start to entertain the idea of forming a team around that service, having a small backlog, and being able to produce a working test and increment of that product at the end of every sprint, right? I'm going to pause for a second. What questions do you guys have? I'm totally not even using my slides today. I hope you guys don't mind. Yeah, go for it.
Well, a couple of things.
Yeah.
One of the issues with, I've worked with legacy systems and also in terms of Agile and Kanban. One of the things about those kind of systems is that in Agile, we optimize flexibility over efficiencies and economies of scale. The problem is when you're working with COBOL or IMS or these kind of systems, it's labor intensive, and so therefore, a flexible approach of just going in and making small incremental changes and getting out, not a very effective way of doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, and so there's a disconnect there between what the teams know that they should do. That's why the 10 pounds of dirt doesn't fit into a 5-pound bag.
So I'm going to say it probably way more simply and way more generalized, and I'm not trying to speak to your deep expertise in this area, but typically what I see it as is an encapsulation versus orchestration problem. When we have legacy monoliths, we don't have the kinds of software that lends itself to small teams. Is that fair?
Your tool sets are very different.
Yeah, tool sets are very different, right? And so what I generally see in practice is if we have a legacy monolith like that, what we ultimately have to do is we have to pull it apart and turn it into services, make it more open. Fair?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what I find as a coach when I meet with programs or teams, their previous coaches or scrum masters tried to do the hard conversion instead of meeting the team where they are.
Yeah.
And so just because they are working on like these legacy systems or mainframe, like we're doing the big cloud migration and all that stuff, doesn't mean we can't reach into different tool bags that we have to help them break down and see the vision. So
for sure.
I was criticized at first with the team I was working with because I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to almost my project management mindset and just help them do a traditional work breakdown.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to get our tickets in the system.
For sure.
So we can even have a sense of predictability or feeling of what is done and where we're at in progress. Because before that, it was one ticket open 90 days. And that,
Hey, hold that thought for a second. What were you going to say, Nina?
So going back to your legacy and not being able to do agile, that's kind of what I meant when I said like adapting it to however the team is.
Yeah.
I've worked on legacy systems. I've worked on non-legacy systems.
Yeah.
There's always little pieces of the code that can be completed independent of the entire process.
Well, but can I challenge you for just a second? That's true, right? But think about what we're trying to do in Agile, right? We're trying not to just do little pieces of code, right? We're not just trying to do activities or make little changes and use Scrum to do it. We're trying to put capabilities in front of a customer so that we can get feedback and we can respond to change. Like I could take, to this gentleman's point, I could take a waterfall plan, analysis, design, build, test, deploy, and I could Scrum through it, right? I could apply Scrum to the analysis activities, to the design activities, to the build activities, but that's not going to shorten my 18-month cycle. That's not going to allow me to release early. It's not going to allow me to get feedback or to change direction or anything. And that's what we're doing as coaches a lot because we can't see how to change the underlying infrastructure. We're applying Scrum on top of systems that were not designed for Scrum. So like what we do a lot in an early stage transformation, right? So if I were king of the world in any place I ever walked into, we go in and we would do a business architecture analysis of it. We'd look at, we'd create a hypothesis around what like a domain-driven design for the architecture might look like. We look at the org design. We look at the product hierarchy. And what we're looking for is we're looking for like overlap of that, right? What I want to create is an encapsulated team. But in an early stage transformation, I know that I have dependencies around that team, okay? So kind of a rule of thumb is that anytime you have a dependency, you have to have an explicit orchestration mechanism around it. So dependencies either have to be managed or they have to be broken. As Agile is sometimes when we haven't experienced that, one of the things we'll say is, well, the teams will self-organize away that dependency. Never will happen. In a complex system, that will never happen that way. Couple teams, simple system, maybe. Complex system, really, it's just not going to happen. It's like literally think about like I'm going to apply Scrum to a legacy built car, and I'm going to refactor it dynamically based upon collaboration into like a Tesla design car. Like just not going to happen, right?
I've done that. Traditional waterfall techniques, work breakdown structures, the whole 9 yards, and it requires a change in a philosophy and mindset. You can do it. It's just that it's ephemeral because it won't last, because it's, like you're saying, it's really not based on...
Well, what I'm saying is that, yes, you can apply Scrum into a legacy system, and you can use Scrum to manage a waterfall project, no doubt, right? But we don't do Agile for the sake of doing Agile. We do Agile for all of these cultural benefits. I want collaboration, I want trust, I want teamwork, I want interfaces with the customer. I want to be able to respond to change when I get feedback. Those are the things that we're trying to create. A lot of times it's the legacy infrastructures that are getting in the way. Like sometimes what I'll say that we do, it's like industrial and systems engineering applied to the software factory. And a lot of times software craftsmen will get bent when I say something like that because they're like, oh, software craftsmanship is more like, boutique handmade kind of stuff. Well, at scale, it's not really like that all the time, right? There's a lot of craftsmanship techniques in the team, and I'm not dismissing that. But there is an element in large-scale software where certain components have to be made in certain times, and they all have to come together in a unified way. And when the car ships, the software has to go with it on that date, right? Yeah.
When I look at Agile waterfall,
Mm-hmm.
going back to that, there are certain things to me that I see that Agile does not work well on.
Yep.
There are certain things that are waterfall. I need to do waterfall. Don't try to do everything Agile because it doesn't work.
Well, the only thing that I would say, right? The only thing that I would say is when you look at Agile, right? If you look at Agile and you say, well, Agile is Scrum, or Agile is Lean Startup, or Agile is Safe, or Agile's whatever, we tend to take, like I don't think large batch waterfall is ever a good idea for anything.
Right.
Okay? So let's say I had that legacy monolith. I might have to organize around some things that I'd probably prefer not to organize around. I'm gonna have to manage some dependencies that I would probably prefer not to have to manage. But you can do a lot with Scrum at the team level, orchestrated at like a program and portfolio tier, focusing on small batches. I've told leaders before that if you just broke everything into 3-month chunks, that you would be halfway to agility. Don't ever approve a project more than 3 months, right? You'd be halfway to agility. It's not everything, right? but that's kind of the underlying point that I'm trying to make. It's like if we're trying to apply a process into an ecosystem that is not set up for that process, the process is going to require modification. Ideally, what we want to do is we want to change the underlying structure of the code that we're working in, organize teams around that software, over time start to break dependencies, and then if we can do that, right, if we can organize a team around a business problem with an encapsulated bit of technology, that is what the candidate of a Scrum team is. And so our hypothesis, I'm going to offer you guys this and then let's have a conversation about it. Our hypothesis often is like, if these people would just get it, right, it would work, right? I will tell you that the underlying explicit stated rule of Scrum, I believe it might actually be, if it's not in the Scrum Guide, it's pretty close into the thinking, is that you start doing Scrum. Scrum will show you your impediments. The Scrum Master will work to remove the impediments, and then Scrum will improve over time. Is that fair? You guys ever heard that said at least? Okay. What if your impediments are that legacy architecture? Right? What if your impediments are the governance systems in your organization? What if your impediment is audit and compliance? What if your impediment is funding models? Right? Scrum isn't going to self-organize that away. So maybe just one thing that I would like to just kind of sit in for a minute is when we talk about a culture of agility, this will be kind of a cool tie-in. It's a little bit of, we have to, as coaches, have to be empathetic to the environment that these folks work in. And ask ourselves, what can we do? Like, why are the people being resistant? Do they have a legitimate concern? And what can we do within their ecosystem to help create the types of conditions and frameworks and like an environment where agility can actually happen? right? Any thoughts? Yeah.
Tried to get our release date moved from 11 o'clock to or 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock.
Okay.
And previously they did it from 1 o'clock because we were the tail end system.
Yeah.
I went through bloody hell with release management.
Yeah.
Because, as you're saying, I mean, I agree completely. These legacy institutions are a major impediment in enterprises with agility. And I would throw in the database management groups because it's a shared pool. They almost demand that you change all your database. You identify all your database changes all at the same time.
Right.
Like you said, IT governance. I worked in IT governance. I know how they think.
Yeah.
Change control boards. I directed change control boards. I know how these things operate. They're institutional. They have their own ways, and it's not an agile mindset.
Well, so let's explore that for just a second, right? So we've kind of focused at the team level, like we have teams and team members that are not adopting a culture of agility because candidly, we don't have them in teams. They can't deliver working tested software every 2 weeks. And their backlogs are really a lot of times activities or parts of some overall system, right? So it creates a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance. Let's talk about why your release management people might be hesitant to create a culture of agility, or why your financial control people or your CFO is hesitant to create a culture of agility. Right? So in release management, I bet you your release management, all of that stuff was built over time because the company at some point in its history was putting software into production that was failing and causing problems. Right? Now, I grew up in banking systems. I doubt anybody in this room wants their online banking system to be off by a penny. Is it cool if we just inspect and adapt and we fix that in the next sprint? Like, it doesn't work that way in some systems, right? If you're building autonomous vehicles, like, it's not okay for the car to run off the road periodically, and we're just gonna get that in the next sprint, right? I mean, there's certain systems that have to be heavily governed. And those controls become in place because the ways that we were building software were not producing the right quality attributes. And so we put heavy control on top of it. So that's what those folks grew up in. So now you think about, like, what does Agile say, whether it be the manifesto, the principles behind the manifesto, right? We want solid architecture. We want continuous testing. We want continuous integration. We want continuous deployment. We want continuous feedback. We want continuous validation, right? All these different things, right? So like in a pure play Agile world, I would be able to deliver and test and know if that software was broken all of the time. There would be no release management because it would be built into the fundamental framework of what it was we were doing, right? And so, like, if I were going to change release management's way, right, what I'd have to understand, I'd have to kind of walk them all the way back. Understand their legacy concern, understand why these controls were in place, show them how teams working around components that are wrapped in tests that we know if they're breaking all of the time. Like, we know instantly if something's broken, not at the end of the release, not before we ship, not at the end of QA, right? We have continuous testing, we have all these different things. If we create that kind of environment where the organization knows for a fact that that software is tested all of the time, then we can go to our release management people and we can say, okay, let's look at doing something different. Our financials controls people, the reason why they put financial constraints on top of us is because they have to have some sort of way to manage the teams and to make promises to the market that says if we put X billions of dollars into something, we're going to get something on the date that we need, and we're going to get a return on that investment for our shareholders. And then we show up as Agilists and go, no, that's not the way it works, right? We're just going to expect and adapt, and you're going to get the most valuable thing you possibly can, and it's going to be really great, right? You can't expect your financial controls people to say, oh, okay, cool, I trust that, right? So a lot of times what you have to do in an early stage is you have to build trust with the organization. So you create the teams that have the testing, that can do the continuous integration, continuous deployment. You create the environment where requirements can be decomposed and minimally viable products can be released to market. And we understand the 80-20 rule, and the customers start being really excited, and we're changing. And now, once you do that, but you're doing that under the existing control, then you go back and you say, hey, look at what's available to you now, right? You don't have to control the same way. What were you gonna say? Yeah.
Your 2 points of if testing at the end, but you want to build testing throughout the system.
Yeah.
If you do that, then those people don't have jobs.
Well, that's a whole nother interesting thing, right? Because a lot of times, so this is the interesting thing, and this might be kind of an interesting point to kind of wrap up on. I think we're supposed to have 45 minutes for this or something like that. So, yeah, there's a lot of people in organizations that we go into, and they're not really trying to write better software. They're trying to protect their pyramids. They know that to be a VP, they have to have so many people under them, and if half their team leaves, then they're going to get demoted, or they're not going to get promoted, or something like that, right? Yeah, that's like a real concern, right? So like one of the things that I'm kind of on a little bit of a tear on some of the videos that I'm producing right now. It's like I'll tell you why I'm on this tear. Because the last time I did this talk, it was in Raleigh at the Agile conference that they have down there. But there's a friend of mine who's in the coaching community, and if he watches any of this stuff, he knows I'm talking about him, so it's kind of funny. But he said something like, he's like, Mike, as Agile coaches, we can't change the teaming strategies. We can't change the organization. We can't create the conditions, right? And I think that's what a lot of us think about, right? They're sitting in these legacy organizations. I'm not the CEO. I'm not the CIO. I can't authorize a refactor of the legacy platform, right? And so what we do, right, we locally optimize. We do the best we can in the space that we're in, right? I get it, right? I mean, if you're building cars and somebody says, hey, we're gonna do Scrum to build cars, you don't have the ability to totally refactor that car's ecosystem and turn it into a fully electric vehicle, right? That's not within your purview. That's above your pay grade. And it takes time to do it even if you can, right? But what I think that we have to do, so what happens is that we get stuck behind our constraints. We get stuck behind our understanding of what we believe is possible. And that's okay, right? Sometimes it's not possible. But to kind of pull this empathy thread a little bit, like what we have to understand is where the processes that we advocate for and we believe in so deeply, where they fit and where they don't. And when they don't fit natively, it's reasonable to ask ourselves, what can we do to achieve the greatest agility possible without the ability to actually change things? If you're a leader in an organization that's authorized an agile transformation, right? Well, then I would suggest that it's incumbent upon you to fully understand the implications of what you're asking folks to do. Because if you ask folks to do Scrum and to operate with agility, or to do SAFe and to operate with agility, and it doesn't produce the agility you want, more often than not, it's not because the teams aren't doing Agile right. It's because the ecosystem that Agile was applied to was not conducive. You guys are probably get all, I don't talk about SAFe and other methodologies very often. But one of the, I think it's really interesting with the backlash sometimes in the Agile community around SAFe, right? SAFe is a very pragmatic response to the presence of dependencies in large organizations, right? If you really look at all that really is, it's like SAFe is just a big room, group release planning session where everybody sits and figures out what all their dependencies are and ties it up to a portfolio and tries to make some strategic decisions. Like conceptually, it's not complicated. But what SAFe capitulates to, which bums a lot of people out, is the idea that dependencies and leadership and management is inevitable. Well, it might not be inevitable, but it is clearly present, right? So SAFE is a capitulation to organizational challenges, failures in the ecosystem that we can't overcome right away. My only beef with SAFE is that, do people say beef anymore? And people in college used to say that. My only issue with SAFE, funny, I just caught myself saying, my only issue with SAFE is that it says that this is the idealized end state. Like, it's fine to start with SAFE. Sometimes it's necessary to start. We put compensating controls in organizations all the time to deal with dependencies and less than idealized conditions because we have to create some agility. Yeah, so it's a start. It could be a starting point. And I'll tell you, a lot of companies are so tangled up that SAFE is actually too agile for them, right? I mean, seriously. So a lot of times, like, you're dealing with heavily governed, heavily structured organizations. You've got to do an 18-month roadmap. You've got to do 3 to 6 month release plans, not even just a release, right? You've got to get more granular in your decomposition. Like, a lot of times we put in really strict, like, feature level, epic level, Kanban structures to orchestrate work across. So we're attempting small batches, but we're doing it in a really plan-driven way, because that's the only thing that you can do. So we're doing Scrum, we're doing small batches, and getting a lot of it right, but that will, like, put the training wheels on the organization, and then you can get them to SAFE, right? Because SAFE requires encapsulated value streams. Right? You start having dependencies between value streams, and SAFE's going to start breaking on you too. Okay, so anytime there's dependencies, it's going to fail, right? So the whole goal is how do you begin to progressively encapsulate the organization over time, start to break dependencies so that people can actually act autonomously, so that they can actually be collaborative, so that they can actually produce working tested software in small batches for their client, so they can actually change direction when they learn new things, so that your release management people can know that it's safely tested, so that your financial controls people can know that they're being responsible to market. But if we don't create the conditions for that, kind of labeling the organization as non-agile or doesn't have a good culture, or telling leaders that they don't need to be command and control, like, all of that stuff, it just rings hollow. And I'll tell you selfishly, it makes us look kind of silly as an industry when we say stuff like that. Right? So, like, what we have to do is that we have to be way more pragmatic with our agility, deeply understand the principles underneath what we're doing, understand when it works, understand when it won't, and then make sure we have appropriate compensating controls. And then within that framework, the culture of agility will begin to emerge. Okay? So that's what I'm going to send you off with into the rest of the day. I appreciate you guys coming to talk.